Hey everybody, it's Dan here from Cooks Illustrated. I want to thank everyone for all the awesome comments on the burger video. We had a lot of fun making that. We've got a lot of really cool episodes coming up. But I want to take this opportunity. We're going to publish those basically every 2 weeks. So on the off weeks, I'm going to go through the comments and choose a couple of questions to answer. So please leave comments. Let me know what you're thinking. If you have other follow-up questions, I'm happy to answer them. So I've just chosen a few. I've got my notes here, and we're going to go through them. The first comment was that I wanted to address was there was not a question. It was just Dan Souza 2020, which I assume is a reference to running for president in 2020. And I want to say I'm flattered. I was class president in high school, and I think that experience probably took a couple years off my life. Pretty stressful, and that was, a 200-person high school class. So I'm not sure I'm really in a place for politics, but again, really appreciate it. Totally flattered. All right, so let's hop into some questions here. So the first question, which I thought was a really good one, was a question around whether you negatively impact the flavor of the meat by putting it in the freezer. So the amount of time that we're talking about freezing these cubes of meat is around 30 to 40 minutes. It's going to depend on how crowded your freezer is, but you need it to firm up enough that when you grind it in the food processor, it doesn't smear the fat or really activate the myosin, that really sticky protein. The good news is that 30 to 40 minutes is not long enough to negatively impact the flavor of the beef. When we store things in the freezer for longer periods of time, over 2 weeks, up into the month range, we risk the problems of freezer burn if it's left in contact with air. So if it's not sealed particularly well in a bag, it can oxidize, and that stuff doesn't taste very good. But the good news is 30 to 40 minutes, which is going to depend on your freezer, how crowded it is, but that amount of time, you have to worry about flavor at all. So that's a great question. Next one I wanted to answer was some questions around what cuts of beef to use for this recipe. And I purposely left the video a little bit vague because, as I mentioned, you can use lots of different cuts for this. So as long as they're fatty, we're looking for something in the range of 80-20. So 80% lean meat to 20% fat. You can go even as far as 75-25, so even more fat in that mix. You don't want to go really in the other direction. As I mentioned, that fat plays a lot of key roles. It really makes for a burger that is really juicy, and so you don't want to go too far down on that. But again, there's a lot of different cuts to choose from. The one in the video is a chuck roast. It's a chuck eye roast, and that's kind of the classic cut for burgers. It's what you see a lot of ground beef at the store. It comes from the chuck there, but you can also get more creative than that. So if you want to move outside of it, we really like using flap meat, which around here in New England is called sirloin steak tips. But I think flap meat is probably a little bit more common outside of kind of the Boston area. And the cool thing about that is it's actually not all that high in fat, but it has really, really good beefy flavor and great texture. So normally we don't make a burger with just that. We've done it before, but a lot of times we'll mix it with something else, and short ribs are another fantastic cut. And I'm talking more specifically about boneless short ribs. You could use bone-in short ribs. It's a slightly different cut. It has a lot more fat. And then you're gonna have a lot more trim, getting rid of the bone and some of the connective tissue between the bone and the meat. But boneless short ribs, if you did like a 50-50 ratio of flat meat to boneless short ribs, it's fantastic. We have an older recipe that uses that combination, which is really nice. But you can also get kind of creative. So if you're finding, as long as you go to your butcher and you're asking for cuts that are in that 80-20 range, it works really well. And I think honestly, chuck is fantastic. I go to that a lot. Okay, so the next one was about the difference between grinding in a food processor versus in an actual grinder. And this person brought up the point that they're not the same thing, and it's true. You get a slightly different product out of grinding in the food processor versus grinding with actual grinder. The reason we love the food processor, and I love that, is that everyone has one in their kitchen for the most part. So it's it's really easy to use. You're already going to have it on hand. Not everyone has a grinder. That being said, if you have a grinder, absolutely use it for this. You can pick up those hand crank models, which I think Adam, who left this comment, mentioned. Those hand crank models are great as long as the blades are sharp and it's in good condition, and they're pretty cheap. You can also get an attachment for your KitchenAid, which is another nice option. I have to say though, I tend to prefer grinding in a food processor to a grinder. And the reason is, if you chill the meat enough when you food process it, you produce very little of that sticky myosin. So you can go a little too far. If you freeze it too much, you can get a mixture that just doesn't have enough myosin and actually like crumbles apart, which is kind of going to the extreme, but in a way it's good because then you can control exactly how much you knead this thing together and make your burger. So you can make something that is really, really tender. So I've been grinding, and I'll put it in quotes, but it is grinding the meat for a long time in a food processor, and I really love the results. So don't shy away from doing it that way, but if you have a grinder, absolutely use it. Someone else brought up the point that you can go to your butcher and have them grind stuff for you too. That's absolutely an option. Not all butchers are great about doing it or want to do it, but if they will, absolutely. You're looking for something that's a coarse grind, and across the board, you're looking for something that's a coarse grind for most burgers, and that's usually in the particle-sized pieces of about 1/8 of an inch is what we call for in a number of our recipes. But again, that's something you can play with too. There's nothing super prescriptive about that. If you want something a little finer, something a little bit more of an elevated style of burger, then you can go finer. I kind of knew this would happen. I got a lot of questions and some strong language around the use of American cheese. And I love American cheese. It is a divisive thing, I know that. But American cheese, nothing else melts like it. And I actually think of it on a burger as almost like another sauce because it melts so beautifully. It fills in all of those little cracks and craggy places in the burger, and it just adds a ton of awesome moisture. Super mild flavor, but honestly, I really want to taste the beef when I'm eating a burger, so I don't mind that it's mild. I love blue cheese on a burger too. That's fantastic, but that really competes with the flavor of the beef a lot. So I'm actually going to do an upcoming video on a grilled cheese sandwich. A whole video on grilled cheese sandwich, which I love, and in that I'm actually going to dig into all of the science of cheese, of cheese aging, cheese melting, and some really cool stuff about American cheese. So if I offended you with that, I apologize. But again, it's personal preference. I love it. If you don't love it, totally do something else. The point is that I just want you to be in the kitchen cooking and making it the way that you like. Okay, so I am out of time, but I'm going to be back next week with a brand new episode of What's Eating Dan, all about ice cream. So don't miss it.